There's been a few interventions since then, but as a rule, they've been less disrespectful of my rights, and actually, in some cases, pretty well 100% respectful of my rights. So they're basically no longer telling me, you can't do this, you can't do that. They're basically recognize that yes, you can have chalk slogans, yes, you can have freestanding picket signs, and so on and so forth. So they've pretty well recognized, what I knew all along is that basically everything I'm doing is well within my constitutionally guaranteed civil rights and freedoms. So anyway, that's my spiel about the SPVM interactions here. And yes, they did include some arrests in the past. In one case on bullshit criminal charges. In December of 2000, I was arrested, quite surprisingly, because a few weeks earlier, in November of 2000, or possibly late October of 2000, I was watched by a police officer in a supervisor's van who watched me. Again, I was basically under surveillance for a good 15 or 20 minutes, maybe as much as half an hour, and the guy was watching me, walking back and forth with my picket sign. So I finally crossed the street and just asked the guy, I said, is there anything wrong? Like, do you see anything that I'm doing that's not acceptable or whatever? He said, no, everything looks good to me, everything seems fine, Those weren't his exact words, but that was his response essentially. He said, no, everything's fine, no worries, And then he drove off, and just a few weeks later, this police car drives up, police officer gets out and says, I'm here to arrest you. And it was like, no ifs, ands, or buts. Like, there was no like discussion. Like, no, I've been basically, the guy'd been ordered to arrest me. So he did arrest me. It went very well. Like, I didn't resist or anything. And when I asked what I was being arrested for, he said public nuisance. And so I thought, well, this is interesting. They're arresting a peaceful public protester for being a public nuisance. Well, gee, I thought protesters were supposed to be something of public nuisance, But what it turned out is there's a section of the Canadian Criminal Code, in the public nuisance section of the Canadian Criminal Code, there's a law that prohibits disrupting the order and solemnity of church services. It's section 176.3 of the Canadian Criminal Code. And so essentially what happened is that the leading members of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, if not the Unitarian Church of Montreal as a institution, had arranged to have me arrested for allegedly violating that law, even though my protest is outside the church, in no way directly disrupts the service, even though I'm almost invisible to people inside the church when the service is going on, and they're in the sanctuary. This is the sanctuary right here, and as you can see, there's only a few slit windows. Two of them are way too high to be seen out of, because people sit at ground level. There's no like upper balcony that they could look down through. So this window right in the middle here, this is completely blocked by a memorial for the firefighters who were killed when the church's transsexual organist had a bad hair day and burned down the church in, I believe, 1987. I believe it was the 30th anniversary of that fire this May. And so really this is the only window where they might possibly catch a glimpse of the top of my hat going by the window if they happen to look 90 degrees to their right, because they're actually facing the back of the church. So just, I can't be seen, or, the only way I can be seen is if someone wants to see me, is what it comes down to, at least in terms of the sanctuary area. And I obviously can't be heard because A, I'm not making a whole lot of noise, and B, even if I was making a fair bit of noise, the church is a modern, I'd say relatively soundproofed building. It was designed to be a place where concerts could take place, so I presume it's reasonably soundproof. But I'm not making noise anyway, so I essentially cannot be heard inside the church. So one wonders how I could possibly disrupt the order and solemnity of church services with my protest outside the church. And of course, the short answer is I can't and didn't. But it took about 3 years to be acquitted of those bullshit criminal charges that the Montreal Unitarians had me arrested on in efforts to force an end to my protest. Because if I'd been convicted of that crime, besides possibly ending up in jail for a couple of years, I could have been forced to sign a kind of like a restraining order thing, where I would be forced to, promise not to protest, outside the Unitarian Church of Montreal for, a certain period of time, or possibly even permanently. But no conviction was obtained. The prosecutor was unable to prove a single one of the 4 or 5 points of law that he had to prove beyond reasonable doubt to obtain a conviction. Not a single one of them. And so I was acquitted, to make a long story short. So that's, pretty serious misuse of the Canadian Criminal Code in efforts to silence my criticism of Unitarian Universalist injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy, which do in fact include such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers. So anyhow, basically it wasn't my intention to talk all that much about the SPVM today, but since that police car slowed down and had a look, I decided I'd do a little spiel about my interactions with the SPVM. And I have to say that the last intervention I had was less than 2 months ago. It was middle of May, and I was in the middle of writing a chalk slogan right where today's chalk slogan is. We'll just go and have a look at the chalk slogan. So I was like right here, basically down writing this chalk slogan. Well, not this one, but one like it, but on this area, when a SPVM police car showed up and basically pulled up and parked just behind me. And the police officer in the passenger side, rolled down his window and he asked, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm writing chalk protest slogans," or something like that. And it went from there. He was actually very polite and even friendly. He wasn't in any way intimidating. Just asked me nicely if I knew what all the rules were, and I said I think I did. And so that video can actually be seen as well. I don't think I've identified it specifically as anything special, but nonetheless, that was one of the more pleasant interactions with SPVM police officers that I've had in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. It went very well. The guy totally respected all of my rights. He in no way contested my right to write the chalk slogans. He in no way contested my right to have some freestanding picket signs, which were clearly visible to him, which is as it should be. That's how it should be. Unfortunately, far too many SPVM cops in the past did contest these things. I was given tickets for writing chalk slogans. I had my picket signs seized and destroyed by some overly authoritarian and aggressive SPVM cops back in, I think, 2005. It was going back a while, but they basically seized all my picket signs and destroyed them, which is essentially theft. They had no right to seize them in the first place, and they certainly had no right to destroy them. They should have been kept as evidence if they were going to charge me with some sort of crime, and I should have been able to get them back. Because this is actually one aspect of my arrest for allegedly violating 176.3, the Canadian Criminal Code. My picket signs were seized at that time. A lot of them, pretty well all of them were seized, if I remember correctly, and taken as evidence to be used against me in the trial. When it was all over, I was able to get my picket signs back, and then another time I was arrested for unpaid tickets, essentially. Or no, I think it was actually, if I remember correctly, I was protesting. This was around sometime after I'd been arrested, a good time after I'd been arrested actually, and I'd missed an initial court date because I hadn't been informed about it. I had not been served the papers by the bailiff, or had not been mailed the papers or had somehow not received them, informing me of a court date, and I missed it. And so I was arrested for missing the court date. The cops came by and arrested me outside the church when I was protesting. And so my picket signs were seized then, and I was taken to a station, I can't remember which one, by these cops. By the way, they were very good. They were very polite, very professional. They even asked if the handcuffs were too tight, and I said, no, they're fine. So they were basically just fine. And, so I was processed, at the station. I was actually in a cell for a few hours. And when I was leaving, all of my stuff had been seized. And in fact, when you are arrested, when you go into the jail, they take, your wallet, your belt, everything. They take your shoelaces. They don't want you to hang yourself with your shoelaces in the cell. So, I'm getting my shoelaces back, I'm getting my belt back, and getting my wallet back. And the cop behind the counter, gives me my picket signs back. And a couple other cops remarked on this and said, what, you're giving him his picket signs back? And the guy behind the counter said, yes, he's a gentleman. This was in French, oui, c'est un gentilhomme. So that went quite well. Basically the cops in that situation handled themselves very well. No complaints about their behavior. They were just doing their job, and they did it politely and professionally, and even basically a non-confrontational way. Basically zero complaints about that particular intervention. But it shouldn't have happened, because I shouldn't have been arrested in the first place on that bullshit charge of violating Section 176(3) of the Canadian Criminal Code. But I'm not going to complain about cops who, basically had no choice but to arrest me because I'd missed a court date. Like, that was their job. Someone misses a court date, you're supposed to find them and arrest them and make sure they show up at court on another occasion. And the whole point is that intervention, which was an arrest, and did involve, I'd say approximately 2 hours in a jail cell, was handled very, very well. No complaints about it. And it was kind of nice how the gentleman who gave me back my property as I was leaving even said, he's a gentleman. Which I think I am most of the time. If someone's a real asshole with me, I might not be a gentleman, might be less than gentlemanly with that person, but as a rule, I try to be a gentleman most of the time. So anyhow, hadn't intended to talk a whole lot about the SPVM, but because this police car slowed down and had a look, I thought I'd have a little chat about those things. But maybe